Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IATSA Secure Connections podcast. My name is Ryan Morris, and I'm your host today. I will be joined and having a conversation today with our newest sponsor and member of the community and the founder and CEO of ThreatLocker, Danny Jenkins. So, Danny, welcome to the conversation.
Ryan, thank you for having us here today.
Absolutely. We are always glad to get a new perspective. There's a million challenges that we deal with in the world of cybersecurity, and every different perspective helps us get maybe a little bit closer to an actual answer for creating a safe, confident, and secure cyber world. So we're really excited to get your point of view, and probably the best way for us to get started here today would be to have you give us an explanation of your point of view on the difference between zero trust versus the threat detection type of styles of cybersecurity. Kind of start us out with that general point of view, and then we'll get more specific as we go. But give us your point of view. Why zero trust? How is that your preferred methodology?
Well, so here's the thing about security. We're in this rat race, and we're essentially, you got the bad rat and the good rat. There's any such thing as a good rat, and we're running against the bad guys, and the bad rat eats more protein than we do, so he's always ahead of us. And we have to change that. We have to change that so we're not constantly racing against someone else to see if we can be better, we can be faster, we can be quicker at detecting threats. The concept of detecting threats, it's not a bad thing. It's just not a complete solution. It's a partial solution to the problem. I like to think people talk about security as layers. And when they talk about layers, they start saying, oh, I got a perimeter, I got email, I got web. They're not layers, they're entry points. They're things you have to protect. Security is, I like to think of it as a triangle. And there's this, if you think about a security triangle, there's three ways you can stop any security threat, or three potential ways. Not all of them work. At the bottom of the triangle, I think we have the people, the human element. So if you get a piece of malware in your inbox and you ignore it, threats foiled, problem solved. Now, I don't know if we're allowed to cut people's hands off yet. Outside of that, I don't know how much we can do to fix the human problem. Yes, we can train them and we can make them 5% smarter. But look, people are going to be people. They make mistakes. Even the most technical people make mistakes. So there's only so much you can do on there. The other way, which seems to be the MSP way a lot of the time, is this idea of lots and lots of ways of detecting the threat. So we're going to go out, everything we see, that piece of malware, we're going to say, what can I do to find out if this is good or bad? And essentially what we're doing is we're standing in a room and we're looking at people and saying, this guy looks smart, he's wearing a suit, he must be a good guy. This guy, doesn't look so smart, this is a bad guy. And the threat detection guys are trying to find out what's good or bad. And they're doing that through essentially blacklist. Is someone been bad before? Of course, if someone's robbed a house before, they got a criminal record, it's pretty easy. But someone hasn't been caught before, it just means they're better at their job or better at being a bad guy. So you're going to add all these different layers. And we think about trying to detect, we think about blacklist, we think about heuristics, we think about behavioral analysis, you think about post-breach detection, things like that. They're good to have in there, but they're not going to stop all the threats. The third type of security is this area of control. And that's where zero trust sits in. It's about physical controls. And if we're thinking about the endpoint, if we're thinking about malware, we're thinking about things like application whitelisting, deny by default. So when that user opens that piece of malware and the antivirus detects it or doesn't detect it, the application whitelisting, the default deny, it's going to block it because it's not on a list. Because we're saying, hey, this isn't on a list, it's not allowed to run. We have the same concept with our firewalls. We have firewall rules that say everything's denied unless it's allowed. And then we have intrusion detection and prevention to detect something that is allowed that might be suspicious. They're great complements to each other. But the bottom line is you wouldn't open all the ports on your firewall and say, I'm going to leave it up to the IDS to figure this stuff out. It's just not possible. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, put more controls in place. Don't rely on detection. Don't rely on the user. Think about controls. Those controls look like application whitelisting, stopping applications, whether they're malware or TeamViewer or IP scanners, from running that aren't trusted. and then control what they can do when they are running, control storage, even things like, and this is stepping out of ThreatLocker's arena, even things like dual factor authentication. That is a tangible control that you can do. You can't stop your user being phished. You can't guarantee your email is going to detect that phishing link. But what you can do is make sure that dual factor authentication is enabled, much like that on the endpoint. Operate in the world of controls, absolutes, and you're going to be far more effective in this fight against cybercrime.
Absolutely. See, and I agree with your original premise. The user is the most vulnerable element of any security protocol. And no matter how much education we do, which, like you said, I think we ought to always be educating, making users more aware of threats, of their behavior, of what the vulnerabilities might be. But even I admit that's never going to actually be enough to solve the problem. We need to have an environment where an educated person is prevented from being their own worst enemy, right? Like it's not always malicious and it's not always a lack of awareness. Sometimes the bad guys are just really good at their jobs and they can get through. As you're looking at the world of threats, right? Do you see that there are more sophisticated attack methodologies, more frequent? What are you seeing in terms of the trends that we need to make sure we're educating our customers on so that they take this issue as seriously as we want them to take it? What kind of trends and evidence are you seeing out there right now?
So I think the first thing to think about whenever you're thinking about security is whatever you think, and that applies to everyone in the security space, you don't know shit. Like you can't know everything. And we are seeing more and more advanced malware, more and more advanced ransomware. What we're seeing that's really interesting is back 10, 15 years ago, big enterprises had to worry about being targeted. You had to worry about being in the crosshairs of someone, and you had to worry about someone coming after you. Small businesses had to worry about self-propagating malware, love bug, blaster, things like that, but they were never really the target. Today, that shifted. I mean, we just saw this oil pipeline get hacked, and we saw them release an apology for taking down the East Coast oil lines, which is unbelievable that a cyber criminal is going to issue an apology. What they realized is they bit off a little bit more than they can chew. They're worried about a missile going to the side of their building or something, and suddenly this isn't good business sense. In their apology, they literally said we were going to hit less controversial targets going forward. And what that means is exactly what they're doing already, is we're just going to go after the small businesses. We don't care. We don't want to fight with Joe Biden. We don't want to fight with the White House or the federal government or the US Army. We just want to fight with the local MSP or the local doctor's office or the local credit union. It's much easier. They don't have the security, and we can still make 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand. It's not bad for a few days' work. So we're seeing this trend of small businesses being targeted. And that changes the dynamics, because now people want to get into your house. You got to make sure your locks are good because no one's tried to break into my house, touch wood. But if I literally had gold bars and everyone knew about it sitting on the other side of the thing, I'd want to make sure the locks are good. So we're seeing this change in the way cybercrime is thinking. The other thing we're seeing is that the dynamics on how they're doing it is changing. I mean, the thought process, the effort that goes into it, from I'm going to send an email, that's going to give me a foothold. So I'm going to get a remote shell on someone's machine. I'm going to copy files onto their file share. I'm going to replace documents with executables that look like documents and serve up the original documents. That's going to allow me to laterally move inside their environment. I'm then going to scan the network, figure out, map it, plan it, get their backups, and then I'm going to crypto locker them tomorrow or just upload their data. We're seeing this huge change in this, and it's virtually impossible to detect. I mean, we see it every single day. Someone tries to breach a client by doing that. And it's just getting harder and harder to detect that threats because it's constantly changing.
And I mean, that's the thing. I think you make a very good point. This is not the first time we've had this conversation with our end users. We've been sounding the alarm about cybersecurity threats for literally decades. And yet the percentages that we're seeing in our research, the number of end user organizations who can say that they have both a detection, control, and education methodology in place for security, it's kind of low double digits. 1 in 7, 1 in 8 organizations can meet those 3 basic criteria that you described. That's just not good enough. And so it's almost like we need to have a different conversation with the end user, that it's not just, we're harping on the same thing and becoming tuned out. They need to know this is new and it's different, and it's something that they need to be aware of. I'd love to get your opinion on the way our industry tends to approach that conversation. I hear, unfortunately, a lot of the FUD factor, right? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The bad man is out there to get you. Technology is vulnerable. You'll never be secure. Give me all your money for some of my software. I tend to think that the fear approach has the opposite effect that we intend it to, right? If our intention is to get people to take positive action and create a more secure environment, fear is the opposite of action, right? Fear motivates people to just go into a hole and be defensive. Is there a better way to educate the customer about all these things that are going on without resorting to trying to scare them into action?
Well, and I think, first of all, you're right. People go into a hole, and when you say it's impossible not to get hacked, then people say, well, I might as well get hacked. If you could go outside in it, you would say, you are going to get COVID. It doesn't matter what you do. You just say, I'm going to go outside. Like, why am I locked up inside if there's things I can do that can stop it, then there's things you're going to do that will stop it. So security isn't magic. I mean, everyone thinks it's magic. Everyone thinks it's some mystical thing. I mean, hacking isn't magic. It's a combination of scientific actions that you take that manipulate people and use technology against them. There are lots of things you can do. My background's in enterprise security. I've done white hat. I've been on red teams. I've gone in every position you can think of. But it's always very, very simple ways you get into businesses. And look, there's normal things you can do that I'm sure everybody's already doing or trying to do to the best of efforts now. You can patch your systems. You can make sure you've got an email security and a firewall, and you've turned on your antivirus and things like that. These are basic things you can do. But there's also real tangible things you can do. Like you can block things by default. It's not that difficult. I mean, take any of your clients now and look at what they use in their business. You're going to see 5, 10, 15, 20 applications, maybe a healthcare app, maybe Google Chrome, maybe Automate. That's what they need to run. If you can block everything else, take that same attack with the oil pipeline. What we've done is we've said, look, they ran a program. It didn't come in by magic. It wasn't some genius hacker sitting in the corner that pressed some codes. Somebody opened something which allowed them to run software on their machine, which allowed them to gain remote access, assumingly, and spread laterally in the network. Stop things running that is outside of your client's list of applications. Then you're not sitting there going, is the latest piece of malware going to get used? Is someone going to weaponize? I mean, we saw the water company in Florida. I don't know what's more terrifying about this case. TeamViewer was running on a computer that controlled the chemical levels in the water. So that's the first terrifying thing. Someone got in and changed the sodium hydroxide levels, I think, to 11,000 parts per million. And they were able to do that with TeamViewer. There's 2 things that terrify me about that situation. One is, why is TeamViewer running on that machine? The other thing is, why can one guy who gets paid 45 grand a year, who might get disgruntled one day, poison the water by changing a knob? But if you put controls in place, if you say, this is the software we need, you massively reduce your risk of attack. You can really take back the edge. And yes, no one's unhackable, but the White House isn't unpenetrable, but good luck in trying to get in there if the most people want to get in there. Yeah, I mean, you can put yourself up at that kind of level with very little work. And then when an application needs to change, you have a process, your IT team approve it. It takes 60 seconds or whatever it may be to approve it. You've gone through that check and balance, and it means okay, somebody just didn't open an email attachment today and end my business.
See, and I really appreciate that different side. It's not that we're being naive and saying the threats aren't there and the bad guys aren't that bad. We're not being, we're not being blithe about the approach to cybersecurity. What we're saying is, if you do these simple things, you can actually be in the world and confidently secure. Glass half full versus half empty, if you will. I think that gives the end user who's not a technical professional, they don't understand all of the details of the way that these vulnerabilities happen, but they know that somebody does. So let's go out into the world, right? I remember, I think it was 23 years ago now, the first time I sat through a vendor training presentation on cybersecurity. It was a well-established, known brand name, a couple of decades ago. And they said, well, basically there's two security postures that you could have. You could be vulnerable and need to implement all kinds of software layers, or you could just disconnect from the external network. And they were not actually joking. They were basically, the only way to be secure in the world was to not be connected to the world. And I remember thinking, well, that's kind of the opposite of what everybody in our industry is trying to accomplish, right? If I want you to put your applications in the cloud, if I want you to share data from multiple geographic locations, if I want you to do digital business with your customers, all of that requires connection. And therefore, we can't have the just run away from this problem. You have to do something proactive to solve it. And I like the fact that you can have that conversation with a customer and sound responsible, but actually sound optimistic about our ability to thrive in a connected world.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. There are things you can do, and they're not complicated, and they don't take away the risk. Even if we look at some of the more serious breaches recently, if we look at SolarWinds Orion, we have a number of clients who run SolarWinds Orion, and though that software was breached, it was compromised, it was injected into the code, the clients accepted it, it was on their whitelist, it was bypassed from their antivirus, all of the above. But here's the thing, it didn't get compromised because it was ring-fenced. And it needed to go out to the internet and talk to SolarWinds. It didn't need to go out and talk to these random sites on AWS. So by putting the most simple control in place, which literally takes 30 seconds, you're saying to myself, I've just reduced my probability of this application eating my lunch by 95, 98, 99%. And they're the kind of things you can do. And they're not, look, these aren't things that are magic. It's just a simple control. What does this application need to do? It needs to run. I'm accepting it's part of my business. I'm accepting the risk that comes with doing business with these people. You might not want to accept the risk if it's Angry Birds, but if it's a business related product, you accept the risk. But then you say, how can I reduce that risk? I can reduce that risk simply by controlling what it can do, putting some checkbox around it. It takes 60 seconds and you've just literally taken a huge, big gaping hole out of your security, and for very little work and very little energy. It's as simple as that. That's the kind of advice I have a kind of a rule of thumb. There are those of us who do this for a living, and we think about it all the time, right? This is common, like morning coffee conversation for security and technology professionals. Then there are people who do marketing and sales, and they work in hospitality, and they're teachers in schools. They never, ever, A, they don't think about it, and B, if you try to explain it to them, you really don't want to know what's going on over here. When that population is the one that starts having a conversation about cybersecurity, you know that we've missed the mark, right? When it becomes evening news, non-technical conversation, as an industry, we might have missed this mark. And I think what we're trying to do too much of is let's educate them about all of the rocket science and automation inside these systems without giving them simple, confident steps they can take. And your approach, one of the things I really appreciate as well, there's a defense posture where you're going to protect and just not let things in, right? Deny by default, as you're describing it.
But you're not just ending there at the network. You're also paying attention to the content of the network, the storage, the files that live within your environment. Talk to us for a little bit about that idea of the difference between network protection versus data protection. What are the differences, and how do those two elements play together when we're communicating with our customers?
So there's two things to know here. There's two places where your data can be accessed, and technically in between. So say three. So we've got data at rest, data on your servers. If a hacker gets into your server or physical access, they can get that. And that's actually relatively simple to secure if you have your application secured and things like that. You have it encrypted and things like that. You have data in transit, which is, if someone's getting your data in transit, they're really trying. It's kind of like someone hacking into your home network, shutting down your Wi-Fi to steal your car without your Ring camera recording them when they can just put a headpiece on. It's kind of a bit, they're going down the hard way. And then there's the endpoint. Now the endpoint is where the data has to be unencrypted because humans can't read encrypted data. So at the endpoint is where the data is all visible, seeable, clear text, and in pure English, if you like. So now the challenges you have is when you've got the data at the server and you've got your endpoint secured, what happens if someone logs into that server from an unsecured endpoint? So we got our endpoint secured, we can't run any bad software, the applications that are running are ring fence, but now I've got my server and somebody's trying to get access to it. So what we do as well is we say we want to put those same policies in place on the server. So let's take, I've got a QuickBooks share, and I don't know if you've seen this new malware. It's the most discreet malware in the world. And the only reason we've seen it is because we do approval requests for people, and we've had it requested and we've diagnosed it several times. And essentially what it does is it just, when you open it, it just uploads your QuickBooks database to the internet. Nothing else. Doesn't encrypt your files, doesn't show you any pop-ups of inappropriate content. It just uploads your QuickBooks data to the internet. That then gets sold on the dark web, or they can use it for spear phishing campaigns. It's a hot commodity. But so here's what we've got. We've got our QuickBooks database on a server, and I'll use that as an example. It could be documents, it could be your backup. We only want computers in our organization to be able to access that. So what we can say is, hey, you've got to have ThreatLocker on your endpoint too to be able to talk to this file. So don't come in with your home laptop and try and read the QuickBooks database, because it's not going to happen. So we can say that. The other thing we can say is, what programs need to access this? What users need to access it? Does PowerShell need to access it? Does Office need to access it? Well, the answer is no. Only QuickBooks needs to access it. So what we're saying, this delay data relates to QuickBooks at this endpoint. That's allowed to talk to this. Nothing else is allowed to talk to this. And we're not trusting the user. We're trusting the user and the application combined. So then when something gets compromised, you're not worried about it eating your data. The same applies to your Office documents and your Veeam backup and all of those other things.
Which, and that's the thing, right? Congratulations to the customer base that is listening enough to be doing network protection, and they're doing backup, right? They're preserving, protecting additional copies of their information. That's good. We're proud of the marketplace for taking those steps, but it's still not enough, because the access is the question, right? And like we said earlier, the human is the vulnerability. We need to control their devices as well. It seems like there's a more confident posture that we can take with these threats that are out there. I can't imagine a form of data that a business would be more protective of than their QuickBooks database. Even their intellectual property, even all of their ways of doing business in a protected way. Financial data is the thing that people are most concerned about. If we can just create a closed loop system where only authorized devices have access in only authorized methods and transits, that seems to me that we can give customers the confidence to start thinking of new ways of using their data and their technology. Not that defensive posture of let's lock down as much as possible, but more of an optimistic posture where we can say, well, now let's think of new ways of doing digital business. I'd love to get your thought on this from the service provider's point of view, right? If I'm an MSP and MSSP, there's the question of, does it work? And does this actually solve the problem? And then there's a question of, yeah, but how manageable is it? How much work is involved in setting these things up for the customer, administering them, like you said, dealing with requests for approval. The difference between a confident end user story that we can be very secure versus, oh, and by the way, that's going to take you 1 million people and all of their time 24/7. How do we get the service provider to step up to this new level of protection? What's the story that we tell to them? Is this more difficult to manage? Is it more labor intensive, or is it actually more streamlined? What's your point of view as you're looking to the people who do this work for a living?
So bear in mind, I mean, and there's 2 ways to do security. There's the right way and there's the wrong way. Then there's 2 ways to do ThreatLocker. There's the right way and the wrong way. If you're looking at something like ThreatLocker, and you're thinking about, I mean, take the first part of this. Let's deny by default untrusted applications. The reality is, normal people do not install new software on their computer every day, and if they do, it's already on other computers in their organization. So if you went and downloaded Grammarly for Chrome now, it's probably on someone else's computer in your organization. If it's not, that process is a 30-second approval process if the MSP just chooses to approve it. So it shouldn't be hard work. The work that you typically deal with is default deny, is this concept of applications constantly changing, being dynamic and updating. Zoom updated like 7 times in a month last year, beginning of COVID. And you've obviously got to keep track of that and make sure the new versions are allowed. Well, that's what we do for you. So we have the built-in definition. So when you have a policy for Zoom or ConnectWise Automate or Office or Windows updates or Chrome, whatever it may be, we track those updates for you and we make sure that they're allowed to run. So that takes away a huge part of the overhead. In terms of how much work does it take, you can get as detailed as you want, and there's no limit on how secure you can get. And of course, the more you get into the weeds, the more work you put into it. But where people spend a lot of time in the zero trust world is lack of training or knowledge of the product. So I'll give you one example. I'd had a client, they deployed ThreatLocker. One of the ring fencing policies is we don't want ThreatLocker to go out to the internet unless it's a trusted site. We learned that during learning, and they were trying to run some script which required it to go out to the internet and pull something down. The exact same way that the ransomware just got pulled down in that pipeline attack, but they went out and it was being blocked. They didn't think to, because it was a silent deny, because you could do silent or noisy denies. They didn't think to look at ThreatLocker. 2 days later, they're getting mad that this software isn't working. That's 2 days that would have taken 30 seconds. So that's where zero trust doesn't work, when your IT team don't know what it's doing. In terms of getting in front of your clients as well, it's not a difficult sell. I mean, there is a transition people have to make from becoming IT, going from IT people to security people. IT people have friends, security people don't. And you have to try and divide that line. Nobody goes to a security guy, oh, I want to be your friend, let me buy you a drink, my computer's going slow, can you help me out? IT people have friends. Security people, sometimes you have to go in and you have to tell your client what they need. You go to the doctor, he says you're 40 pounds overweight. He doesn't say, oh, you look great, but you're 40 pounds underweight. I'm not going to overweight, you're going to tell me that. They tell you, and that's what security people have to do. They have to say, these are your risks. I'm a business owner. I get it. Like, I don't want to be told to spend money, but at the end of the day, if you explain something in a clear enough way, these are your risks. This is how this can happen. There's plenty of news to reference, and this is how we can protect you from it and reduce your risk from happening. That's very, very effective. Business owners, at the end of the day, they're going to pay for what's needed. They're going to do what's needed in most cases. I know everyone's got that client.
Well, but that's the thing, right? I appreciate your difference there, because there's an important distinction for this community of understanding the difference between what it is we're doing and how we convince our customers to go with us. That we can solve the security challenge, that's good. That technologically verifiable. We know we can solve the problem. But can we convince our customers to do the right thing? So many people in our industry either are just there to explain the pieces and parts, or they're there to solve a problem, solution selling, right? If the customer feels the pain and they're looking for a solution, I can be here to solve that problem for them. I don't think that that's the appropriate way to take the security story to market. It's not wait till they ask for it and then answer their problem. It is, you need to go educate and motivate and lead people to this conversation, because we can't afford to have, one thing that a very smart person said to me a few years ago was, cybersecurity deals with a communicable disease, right? I could have all the protections in the world, but if I do business with you and your systems are not secure, then by extension, my systems are not secure, right? It propagates across the network that way. None of us can afford to be in an environment where we say, well, some are protected and some are not, and that's okay. It's almost like the service provider needs to take that next authoritative step and just say, this is no longer acceptable. Let me lead you to the better future. How do you think about that kind of communication style with customers?
And there's two issues often you have to deal with, and there's two ways of doing this. There's two approaches, and I'm not here to say one is right or wrong. I certainly prefer one over the other. We have a partner. They manage about 1,500 endpoints, and they're all in the dental industry. 72 dental offices. They are serious about security. They implemented ThreatLocker across the board at a very, very fast rate. I love customers like that. There's a little bit nerve-wracking when you do things like turn it on now in one day, but it's a nice feeling too that you got the solution solved with a little bit more pain in a very short amount of time. They took the approach of, we're going to draft an email explaining to our clients, this is what we need to do to protect you. And we're going to email all of our clients, and we're going to tell you this is going to cost you X amount of dollars more per month. They emailed all their clients, and if you didn't want it, to tell them you didn't want it in advance. Out of 72 businesses, 2 came back and said, I don't want it. Now, the reason I like this way is because it reduces your cost of sales, because because you don't have to knock on every door for an extra $10 per endpoint or $2 per endpoint, whatever you're charging. You don't have to knock on every door for it. So 2 came back, and when they came back, the MSP said, look, I understand why you don't want to spend extra few dollars, whatever it may be, but we can't support you if that's the case, because we can't keep cleaning up after people's ransomware messes. And they just opted in. Then they said, okay, we understand, we're going to go in for it. Like the other way is the whole QBR. We're going to do a quarterly business review. We're going to tell you where you are. And both of these are good ways. It depends on how often you do things and how big your clients are. If you've got lots of clients with 5 users, QBRs get expensive. So, but if you've got clients with 100, 200, 300 users, QBRs are a very effective way of doing that. But most people, when you look at them directly in the face, you don't mess them around. You steer them right most of the time, because IT people are still human as well, and say, this is what you need. They're going to do what you say. And if you explain why and how this can solve the problem, not down to the technical level where we're talking about kernels and fileless malware, but just explain very, very simple terms, just like the news does. I mean, I know half the stuff on the news isn't necessarily explained accurately, but in that kind of essence, business owners understand it. And at the end of the day, no business owner wants to lose his business over $500 a month.
And see, I think that's where we have an opportunity. It is the meeting point of some factors beyond our control, industry challenges, economic challenges, the bad guys getting very technologically advanced. There's a confluence of factors that put it down to right now, this is not an optional conversation as far as I'm concerned. I think we need to take that next step of leadership and not just say, we're over here, let us know if you need some help, we'd be happy to help you. We need to be more proactive and reach out to the customer and say, it is no longer acceptable for any of us to live in a not secured environment. Let's do the easy things. Let's solve what can easily be solved. And then we'll continue to work on, the deeper, darker issues that are still challenging for us as an industry. Well, let's begin with the basics. And I think if every service provider would begin there, it's amazing how much trust there already is built up in our customer base. We just need to be confident ourselves that we can represent that kind of solution.
Absolutely. I will say one more thing as well. When you're building out security, more doesn't necessarily always mean better. And think about that triangle and think about how you're balancing your security. And if you decide, look, I'm not going to put any controls in place, but I'm going to put a whole load of detection in place, I'm going to put 3 layers of detection in place, that is essentially putting 3 house alarms in your house. Contact sensors, motion sensors, glass breaking sensors. Great, you've got more ways to detect it. But if your front door isn't locked, someone can still walk in and take the TV off the wall. It's going to make a lot of noise, but they can still do it. You've got to have the different ways to secure your environment. You've got to have and look, yes, I'm biased here, but I always start with controls. They are the most effective way, more so than anything else. Then look at detection, and then look at people. And the people is just reduces your risk a little bit by.
Absolutely. And again, I think the responsible way is do all of these things. Just begin by doing the simple things of locking the door. I hope that people can embrace that kind of straightforward logic. I think we could go for hours on this conversation. I think that the zero trust movement is something that has given a whole new way to approach customers on the topic of cybersecurity. But if somebody was interested in getting more information about your approach to ring fencing and whitelisting and denial by default, about your technologies, about becoming a partner with you, where should people go to begin some of the research and to reach out to you guys and get some more information?
What I would suggest is if you go to ThreatLocker.com, there's a schedule a web demonstration. You can book a demonstration with one of our engineers. By the way, our engineers are going to walk you through everything. Like, it doesn't matter. They'll do 20 calls with you to make sure every one of your clients is onboarded and locked down, and we don't charge for that. So book a call with one of our engineers. It's a 45-minute demo. Look at the product in detail, deploy a trial of it, roll it out, see what it's like in real environments. I promise you will not be disappointed, and it will not be a 45-minute waste of your time. And just roll it out and see how it goes. We're not going to charge you for a trial. The engineers are there. We have 24-hour support to back you up. US-based, 30-second response time. You can get somebody on a Zoom call.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the very simple action steps, because hopefully people are feeling motivated to get out there and have this conversation. This is one of the ongoing conversations that we have here at the IATSE Secure Connections podcast. So if you guys have additional questions, if you're looking for some additional deep dive conversations like this, please visit us at IATSE.com and look for the podcast and resources tab. You can get some additional information there. My name is Brian Morris. Again, I am the principal consultant for Morris Management Partners, and you can find us on the web as well at morrismp.com. Please let us know what kinds of questions you have so that we can continue to develop these conversations and make them as valuable and as educational for you as possible. So, Danny, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ryan, for having me.